2030.
Saudi Arabia, the Point of Investment Fund,
It's a
there's
big
a lot of excitement
This
around
transformational
NEOM specifically.
change. Every aspect of the kingdom, economic, social, cultural, religious.
2030.
This is the 2030.
Yalla, 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 yalla.
This is the 2030 episode 23. Hello, everyone, and my co-host, Dr. Hanaa and Lucien. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. Very excited for episode 23. Before we begin, I just wanted to note we'll be on a little bit of a modified recording schedule throughout the month of August and actually also a little bit into July. We should have announced this earlier. It was in our emailer and on our show notes on episode 22, but just wanted to note we'll be on a little bit of a modified recording schedule. So not a discontinuation in any way, but episodes may come out at a slightly different times than people are used to. We still have some amazing guests coming up actually in next episode. And of course, we had our wonderful interview in episode 22 with Princess Fada about the really, really awesome tourism sector in Saudi Arabia and the awesome work, I should say, that she's doing in that sector. And that was just so good. And we talked about this before, but basically, I rarely listen to our show after it's produced. I'm sure you're the same way because we're in the show and then the production of the show, we listen to it again. So you kind of are like, okay, how many times am I going to listen to a show? But this one, and usually for our interviews too, I like to listen to just as an end user, as you would say. And she was fantastic. And actually want to read this feedback here from Khalid. Lucien, listened to you and Hanaa with Princess Fada. Incredible journey to listen to on tourism. Thank you. Thank you, Khalid, for that. We emphatically agree. We appreciate that you appreciated it. And this one is from Keith R. and then a bunch of numbers. Not going to read all the numbers, but Keith R. Great show. Thanks. And Hanaa, have you gotten negative feedback yet here on the show, or are we just getting praise?
We're just getting praise so far. I'm still waiting for it. But you know what? I think, we're doing the best that we can. So I really appreciate all of the positive feedback that we are getting. It really helps kind of, keep the show going. So thank you for that.
It is nice to hear the positive feedback. Before we begin, before we dive into episode 23, just want to remind everybody, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. You can actually subscribe to our content via email, and we'll email sort of like a newsletter format. It's terrific. It's got pretty much everything in there, and we'll send it to your email when we publish our shows. You can, of course, just subscribe to us wherever you're getting your podcasts or on YouTube. It's nice to see the YouTube fam really building up. Very, very cool to see that community get big quickly. But you can subscribe to our emails at the2030.com, and that's spelled the same way the show is. The 20 is written out, and then 30 is a number.com. And there's a really easy way just to put your email in there, and then we'll get everything to you. We know everybody doesn't just like listen to this as it comes out, and this is a good way to kind of get it to you just in case. Everybody's busy. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback on the emailer as well. So just nice to have that if you're looking to get our content directly to you. So thank you to everybody as well. And if you can give us a nice rating wherever you're getting your podcast, that also helps us. Thank you in advance to those who have already done it. Dr. Hanaa, let's get into a deep dive.
So I am really excited to talk about this today, especially in light of the bid for the World Cup, which was officially submitted at the end of July. So what I'm going to do today for the deep dive is talk about another podcast episode, which we've used content from Sukrat in the past with Omar al-Jarasi. So this is an interview that aired on July 9th, where Omar hosted His Royal Highness, His Excellency, Abdulaziz bin Turki al-Faisal, who's the Minister of Sports. And they had a really candid discussion about sports with a focus on football. Prince Abdulaziz began the discussion by noting that there is a race against time to realize the ambitions of the sports industry in the kingdom, especially in light of His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030, and as a route to enhance the quality of life. But specifically in regard to football, he notes it's not just about entertainment, but it's about building an industry and a business opportunity as well as a way of life within the kingdom. And considering all of the feedback that we normally get about sports in the kingdom, I thought it was really important to kind of contextualize what's happening inside the kingdom in the recruitment process and the idea of how we're building these teams, these clubs in the Saudi Pro League out. So what the Minister of Sports talks about is he begins with kind of this player acquisition center of excellence description and what's happening there. So there's this entity called PACE, Player Acquisition Center Excellence, which is supposed to really help the clubs recruit. And this is where all of the headlines come from, right? Who are they recruiting? Which clubs are they coming from? And how much are they paying them? He really laid out the details here from the perspective of developing talent. So basically, there's an interest within the kingdom as well as from outside of the kingdom to develop the clubs, the local ones. He talks a little bit about privatization, and I'm going to get to that. But basically, there's, the sports club support strategy, which was the idea of the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and that is financial support for all of the clubs. The sports club support strategy regulates financial structures and procedures. It defines the financial efficiency criteria for the clubs. The strategy is defined as a program based on several pillars, aiming, amongst other things, to develop the financial and administrative system of the clubs, improve the facilities, encourage practitioners to engage in various sports in the club, and increase attendance rates. And it's one of the initiatives of the Ministry of Sports, which includes workshops that, have really tried to upskill the staff and the recruitment arms of these different clubs. And during the workshops, they have, they also support with the strategic plans. Like, how do you determine what your needs are as a club? How do you determine which players you might need? And how do you determine which facilities you might need to develop further? So it really has been kind of the way that the Ministry of Sports has been able to support the clubs. And basically, they want the clubs to have more than just one sport, right? They want there to be multiple different sports, football being just one of them. So El-Jraisi then talks about the PACE, the player acquisition program, on the back of kind of this idea of the development of the different clubs. And he points out that PACE wasn't managed in the same way that the financial support programs were managed, and that there's been a lot of criticism about how the recruitment and attraction of different players was done inside the kingdom. There's been quite a bit of discussion about whether or not there's fairness in which clubs are able to attract which players and whether or not the monetary support is happening at an equal level. So the minister really believes that they are serving each and every club equally and that they want all of the clubs to do well. Because actually one of the key performance indicators and the goals of football in the kingdom is to be one of the top 5 pro leagues globally. So they're trying to really elevate everybody. And recruiting Ronaldo, for instance, was a really big opportunity to elevate the Saudi Pro League. And that process highlighted the importance of managing and regulating the whole idea of recruiting. After they'd gone through the process with Ronaldo, the top 4 clubs know what the budget is from now until 2027 and how much funding they can access to recruit international players. This kind of excludes some of the superstars. Like if Messi was on the recruitment list, then they might make some adjustments in terms of what the budget would be. But really, so far, 97 players were recruited. Only 21 of those are in the top 4 clubs, and all of the clubs have received financial support. And the ones with bigger fan bases are able to get bigger names because they also are more attractive to these players. But the governance process really does entail an application to PACE from the club, and they really need to make their case for why they want those players. Do they need a better striker? Is it a goalkeeper that is going to make their team stronger? They need to build their case, and the training that they offer helps these clubs build those cases. And there needs to be consensus within the club that these are the players that they want to recruit. There was this discussion, again, that he brought up about Mo Salah, who was asking for an astronomical amount of money, way more than Neymar, Benzema, Ronaldo had asked for. But he also wasn't going to come to the kingdom and be part of Al-Ittihad. He would have been on loan from Liverpool just for 1 year. And still, they would be paying more than the other players. So, it's not always worth it to pay the amounts that are being asked. And there is a decision-making process that goes into it. So they're developing the clubs, the stadiums, they're raising the standards. In 2019, the Saudi Pro League was only played in 12 stadiums that were fully equipped to host the games. Now in 2024, 23 stadiums are equipped. And these are equipped in a way that is complying with the, standards of Asian Football Confederation, the International Football Confederation. So they're really upping the game inside the kingdom and making these facilities more lucrative for the players, but also for the supporters to come and watch the games in the clubs. He believes that money is not the only solution. It definitely helps, but there are skills and qualifications that need to develop in order to really rise up and enhance the Saudi Pro League. So clubs can pay out of pocket to recruit more players and do different things. But if they want to benefit from the financial support, then they need to go through the process with the ministry. And if they also want to recruit a player, then they have to do that process as well, because they get the financial support for the different players. So at the end of the interview, he alluded to the announcement of the official submission of the World Cup bid, which was submitted at the end of July. And so we now know that there will be 128 training centers that are necessary. I think it's actually more. I think it was 132 training venues across 15 cities that will be the base camps for the 48 teams, including 72 base camp training sites, with referees scheduled to have access to referee base camp training sites. The formal bid outlines 5 proposed host cities for the FIFA World Cup 2034, Riyadh, Jeddah, Khobar, Abha, and Neom. There's going to be 15 advanced stadiums, including 11 new planned stadiums. We've talked about several of these on the show already, and that includes the new King Salman Stadium, which is going to accommodate over 92,000 spectators. It's set to host the opening and final matches of the tournament and will become the new home ground for the Saudi national team. Again, also Mohammed bin Salman Stadium in Riyadh, the one that's going to be covered in LED screen. There's the new Jeddah Central Development Stadium. There's going to be the Al Khobar Aramco Stadium, which symbolizes whirlpools that appear off the coast during warm summer months. And in Abha, King Khalid University Stadium and Neom is expected to be one of the most distinctive and iconic stadiums in the world. The stadium will be situated within the line, more than 350 meters above ground. It will provide an unprecedented and exceptional experience for fans scheduled to attend the tournament, and so on. I mean, there's so much that was in this bid that was announced. It's very exciting, and my social media is exploding with people, posting about it and talking about how excited they are for the bid, for the new stadiums, and to host the World Cup. So that was, the interview with His Excellency Prince Abdulaziz Turki Al-Faisal, Minister of Sports, on Sukrat.
Yeah, I mean, Hannah, at this rate, I think we should pretty much just talk about football every single week on this podcast, because every time we do that, a new stadium gets announced and we're like on quite a roll. We did a deep dive on all the new stadiums they're doing. Of course, since then, the King Salman Stadium was announced. As you mentioned, they will be doing the opening game and the ceremonies and all of that. And then the final match will be played at that stadium. And then, as you also mentioned, the new stadium was announced at Neom, which is super rad. It's like suspended above looks like it's in the line. And then it's sort of like elevated above the ground. It's kind of hard to describe. You actually just have to like look it up online. It's amazing. So great deep dive. I love this because I'm not getting this. Sukrat is in Arabic, so I'm not listening to it. It's not on my radar. And they are terrific. They have obviously terrific interviews. And this is why I love this, because it's like, okay, this is all new information for me, even as somebody who's very attuned to what's going on in Saudi Arabia. So awesome job. So I just have a few comments to make. First is that when you're building out a sports team, let alone a league, but when you're building out a sports team, there are so many people involved in the organization if the organization needs to be successful. And those people must be competent operators in the club. Often these guys are no-name people that are just rolling up their sleeves and doing all of the work that is completely behind the scenes. And in the United States, where we both are recording this podcast, I don't know if you knew this, Dr. Hanaa, but 93 of the top 100 TV programs last year in the United States were American football games, obviously with the Super Bowl being number one, the most viewed thing. This is a big business if you do it right. And it's the same thing with all the well-established leagues around the world. In Saudi Arabia, what you have is sort of an effort to stand up an existing league with a combination of state money and PIF money in the hope that you can create an ecosystem that attracts investment in. I'm very interested in the comments you made about how the Prince Abdulaziz bin Turki Al Faisal discusses fairness, because that's something that unless he directly addresses it, you're never really going to have a direct answer on it. But if you're trying to build a team, you need these competent operators. You really need to have a very well-run organization. As a Washington Redskins, now Commanders fan, since I was a little boy, and in the last 20 years has been just unbelievably incompetently run. It was one of the greatest teams in American football. Haven't won really anything since then, and now they have all new ownership. What I can see happening in that organization now is a new owner who knows what he's doing, and that's where it starts, right at the top. The new owner hires competent people underneath him to do football operation, and the new owner does not meddle in those decisions because he may think that because he has $6 billion, which is what they sold for, that he knows everything, but he really doesn't. These people, the scouts, the people running food and beverage concessions, all of them work together as a team in a very, very well-run operation if you want to be a winner, and all of those things matter. When you're building a league out from scratch, which is not, again, what's happening, the league has been in existence for decades, but when you're just making a new revitalized effort to create a global league out of a local league, you need to do what I just mentioned, competent operators in clubs at scale. That does involve training. It also involves financial assistance to get things stood up. It requires, as you sort of alluded to, as discussed in this interview, fairness when it comes to who gets money and who's getting training and all of that. I don't know if it is possible for there to be fairness in the Saudi Pro League right now, because you have how many teams? 26 teams or 31 teams? Actually, I'm not really sure, but you have many teams. You have different levels, right? So is Al Fayha didn't get Ronaldo. Is Al Fayha going to this organization Pace and, requesting assistance? Are they, asking to be treated fairly? Are they saying, hey, we need a marquee player to develop our stadium and our fan base so that we can compete and eventually sell? I don't know if it's possible to have true fairness in a situation like this, but you can effort to get to fairness. True fairness comes in the end game, which the PIF and Saudi authorities know is in total private ownership of these leagues. Whether or not you have a salary cap or not, you need an independent operator making investments into players from around the world, or ideally, and I know this is also on their radar, developing local talent so you don't have to pay Ronaldo $250 million and give him a suite at the Four Seasons in Riyadh. You are developing these players. So that goes to my point of when you're building the ecosystem, you go team by team. Ideally, these people are all doing it together independently because competition in that sense breeds a better league. And if you look at the NFL, they're all privately owned. There's no, state investment except for tax-free status, which is the subject of debate for the NFL. But all of these owners are trying to win. They already own the club. They're making investments into players and staff. There's a salary cap because the league does so well, so it isn't unfair like in Major League Baseball where there's no salary cap. If you're the Yankees, you can buy any player you want. Still doesn't mean you're going to win. Two different ways of doing it. But in the Saudi Pro League, you really need to have fairness. But before you get there, you need the investment to make it the type of thing that other people, private citizens, want to invest in. And so I'm not really sure if you can reach that level of fairness, but as long as you're trying and as long as you're making it clear to everybody that, hey, His Royal Highness isn't just a fan of one club or two clubs. He's a fan of the league and he's a fan of the development of the league. We have talked a lot about sports on this podcast, which obviously makes me very happy. But we recently had an interview with Fatima Batouk, who talked a little bit about what they're doing in different sports like tennis, and also the development of healthy lifestyles, which is all key to getting this thing to be sustainable. You really want to have a heavy mixture of young Saudis entering the league, and then you want to have players that really want to play here, not just because of money, but because the league is competitive. So I just wanted to kind of make that point about sort of, if you're doing this, first of all, you need to understand it's going to take a lot of time and effort. Second of all, as he made the point, it's not just money, because money can buy you players. The players could come in, they could leave, and nothing really changes. It's a wasted investment. But if you're building out a league where you're building out core competencies in these organizations and you're developing local talent when it comes to sports, and you are also creating real investment opportunities, it actually seems like the Saudi Pro League right now would be a great investment opportunity if a team were to come for sale, because you could essentially say, look, I see where this thing's going. There's a lot of investment now. The trend is up. The World Cup is coming. Players are going to want to play here. These new stadiums are dope. Like, it seems like a buy from where I sit. And I think that trend is in the right direction. So it's really cool to see Abdulaziz bin Turki Al Faisal come on and discuss at least where his headspace is at, what they're doing from an organizational standpoint with these at the very top, really, and setting up organizations like PACE to make things more fair. Because the end game cannot be that there is just the state investing into the league. The end game has to be private ownership, real competition, and perceived fairness from fans, that if another team has a better player than they have, that it's not just favoritism. So very cool, great topic, I think, and also really cool to get this on our radar. We're a show in English. A lot of our listeners are in the West, in the US and Europe. They're very interested in sports and everything going on in Saudi Arabia, but they may not have seen this interview or may not have heard it. So it's very cool, and I loved it. Yeah, thank you.
No, absolutely. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple points that he did actually address head on, because Omar he throws some hardballs during these interviews, which I think are really important. So, when His Excellency was talking about privatization, Omar was like, he didn't really privatize. It went from one government entity to another government entity, like PIF is government. And the point that he was making there was that actually it means that we can have a separate kind of governing body and a separate department that's dealing with the club. So it's going kind of in stages into private ownership, and that's how they see it. He brought up an example of the Spanish league, and and it was something that he was like, we need to fact check this, but he believes that there was an example of privatizing too quickly and then the state having to kind of intervene and come back and take over some of these clubs for them not to collapse. And they don't want that to happen. So the process of these clubs moving to PIF and other government entities was done in cooperation with the Saudi National Center for Privatization, which helped ensure that the investment was lucrative. They didn't want to privatize immediately. They wanted PIF to buy the clubs, grow the clubs, enhance their skills, their capabilities, protect it from failure. You don't want some private entity to come in, buy a club, have it completely fail because the whole league isn't propped up properly, and then deter future investments in this space. So I think there's a rationale behind not going private too quickly. And the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of fairness, which is such an important point, and obviously, again, there was an admission that there are clubs that are benefiting more than others. The process is now the same for everybody, but they're looking at performance proportionate to spending. And that's a really interesting angle and an important point that he made. So many of the clubs are failing to perform, right? And the Saudi national team is often failing to perform in even regional competitions, despite all of this investment in the clubs and their development. So they might compete against Oman and fail. And people are like, well, you're spending all of this money and you're developing these clubs. Why are we not doing more, doing better than these clubs that don't have a fraction of our budget? And so, this is where the whole money helps, but it's not enough comes in. And he responds to this by highlighting that they know that that's not going to be enough. And that's why clubs now have to have 3-year plans for developing their teams, where if there are new players that they want or are applying for more funding, these applications have to be revised against the club's strategy. Are you going to improve your performance? If you have a plan to build a competitive and professional team, what's your goal? Is it, one cup that you're competing for? Is it a specific championship? Is it all of the above? You'll get the support if you can make your case. And the professional level of playing will not happen overnight. The skills will not be developed today. You have to come with an application that makes sense, and you need to retain your team and build that team kind of culture as a club in order for you then to be considered for some of these applications. I think he was really transparent about the fact that, yeah, some clubs are going to get more funding because they're doing a better job at selling tickets, at selling jerseys, at commercializing what they're doing in a way where they are building a business out of their club and they're making a profit and they're making it, again, lucrative for people to come and watch these games in these stadiums that are being built. That needs to happen. You need a fan base that's engaged, and I think that's important.
Well, but it is easier to get the fan base and be engaged if you're getting the investment into these clubs. And even if you are submitting these plans, you're still going to a final arbiter that says yes or no. And that is where people are going to question the fairness part of this is like, what if the plan is amazing, but one of the decision makers roots for Al Fayha and it says, no, there's no way that I want Al Ittifaq to get this guy because then we would have less of a chance of winning. But either way, imagine what it would be like if they did nothing. It's the classic Vision 2030 discussion you can have on almost every topic. You can poke holes or find problems with things that are happening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but you must always consider what would happen without the vision. If you didn't have any reform at all, the Saudi Pro League would be way down in rankings, by the way, way off 18 teams in the Saudi Pro League, the Russian Pro League, so fail for Lucien. But you need sort of a jolt of life, and that jolt of life is going to sometimes seem unfair. And sure, the investment is going to be imbalanced unless you give every team the same amount of money. That's not a good investment for the state. So this sort of is the best way to do it if you're going to do it, and doing nothing is not a good solution. If this is the end game that you want, is a vibrant league, globally recognized, players being pulled out of Saudi to go elsewhere because they're that good and that valuable, all of those things you need to develop. And as you noted, it takes time, just like Vision 2030 takes time. When it was announced, it was so big and so ambitious, it was really hard to even wrap your head around. So it's very easy to be negative about it and say, well, I don't know, I don't think so. This seems like a lot, but you just get going. You start doing the work. You don't listen to naysayers. You keep going with your vision. You make adjustments as you go. You follow the KPIs where they go. And where you end up is absolutely more advanced and in a better position than you would be if you did nothing at all. So very cool and really great that he is getting out there. And as you said, he was transparent. I mean, having very tough questions asked of him and answering as honestly and truthfully as he can about what they're doing and maybe what the perceptions are about fairness. I think that's really important that people see that and people understand that there's an effort that's, in design to be fair. So really, really cool. Good one,
Yeah,
Dr.
thank
Hanaa.
you.
Let's get to news.
Aramco becomes majority shareholder of Petrorabigh. So Aramco has signed a definitive agreement to acquire an additional stake of approximately 22.5% in Rabigh Refining and Petrochemical Company, known as Petrorabigh, the refining and petrochemical complex, which is in the west coast of Saudi Arabia. They're acquiring this from Tokyo-headquartered Sumitomo Chemical. Under the deal, Aramco and Sumitomo Chemical will each provide $702 million in funding to Petrorabigh and waive loans worth a total of $1.5 billion, they said. Petrorabigh has racked up $2.36 billion of accumulated losses by the end of June, equivalent to over 53% of its share capital, it said on Wednesday. The measures are expected to improve their balance sheet and cash liquidity as part of a remedial plan that Aramco and Sumitomo Chemical intend to explore, which also includes initiatives to upgrade the refinery, improve profitability, and it aligns with Aramco's downstream expansion and Sumitomo Chemical's move away from commodity chemicals towards specialty chemicals.
Of course, we talked in recent weeks about Aramco's other petrochemical arm, SABIC, which it acquired from the PIF in 2020. Hussein Al-Qahtani, Aramco's senior vice president of fuels, said Aramco continues to identify opportunities to strengthen its downstream value chain, secure placement of its upstream crude oil with affiliated refineries, and convert more of its hydrocarbons into high-value materials. By increasing our shareholding, we expect to achieve even closer integration with Petrorabigh. Did I say that right? I've always said Petrorabigh. Anyway, I'm definitely
at the end, like your French R.
okay. Petro
Try
Rob.
it.
Petro Rob. Is that
Raber.
right? Rob. I can't do the back of the throat. Anyway, sorry everybody. And facilitate its turnaround strategy, we look forward to building on our existing relationship in alignment with our strategic goals. As part of a turnaround plan for what was a loss-making venture, it aligns with Aramco's downstream expansion. Sumitomo Chemicals, Sumitomo is fun to say, move away from commodity chemicals towards specialty chemicals. This is basically a strategic adjustment and a co-investment from two massive oil companies. Aramco and Sumitomo Chemical currently each own 37.5% of shares in Petro Rob. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that was better.
Okay, better. Not great. Which was listed on the Saudi exchange in 2008. Wow. Pretty cool.
But upon completion of this transaction, which is priced at 7 riyals per share, Aramco will become the largest shareholder with an equity stake of approximately 60%. And Sumitomo will retain an equity stake of 15%. So, and then the rest is owned by other investors. So yeah, it's a bit of a bailout, but hopefully it will turn around performance.
Huge market for petrochemicals is part of the future for Aramco and its separate diversification plans. Of course, it is an oil and energy company, but their diversification has been ongoing for at least a decade, probably more. They're doing a ton of stuff in venture investments. They have several venture arms, actually, that operate pretty much independently from each other and have different focuses, which is amazing. And that's the kind of stuff that a really mature, very well established, one of the largest companies in the world does to maintain its relevance and its market positioning and, yes, its profits into the future. This is very important for them strategically, both for Saudi Arabia and the local Saudi market, but also for their efforts to become an energy company instead of, where it started, which was, of course, oil. So very cool. 2, the Council of Ministers approves amendments to 38 articles of the Saudi labor law. The Council of Ministers on Tuesday approved amending 38 articles of the labor law, in addition to the deletion of 7 articles and the addition of 2 new articles. The key updates are designed to enhance labor market in Saudi Arabia by improving job stability, safeguarding contractual rights, and fostering professional development and training opportunities for workers. The revisions also aim to increase employment prospects for Saudi citizens and include expanded definitions and guidelines on resignations, assignments, and grievance procedures for workers. I'm glad I'm reading this one because we have a Saudi labor expert on the show as a co-host. Lucky us.
The announcement also included increasing maternity leave from 10 to 12 weeks. So not a huge increase, but
What about paternity leave? What's up with that? Yeah.
It's like 3 days. So the Ministry
Better than
of
0 like it is in the United States. Yeah.
12 weeks is pretty much standard in the U.S. So I think Saudi often benchmark their policies against other economies, and it looks like this is kind of it's standard in the U.S. if you get it. So there isn't really, it isn't really a law that actually makes it happen, but there are standards that are set. So I think the number one place for maternity leave globally is Estonia. I looked this up the other day, followed by obviously a few other European countries, including the United Kingdom, actually. But so in addition to increasing maternity leave to 12 weeks, the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development noted that the new amendments take into account the interests of all parties involved in contractual relationships. So this included an expansion of the item on vacations, labor contracts, adding definitions of the terms resignation and assignment, adding an article specifying the procedures for resignation, amending the grievance procedures, as you mentioned, and adding penalties for practicing the activity of employing workers without a license from the ministry. And the new amendments included fixing the notice period for terminating open-ended contracts at 30 days if the termination is sought by the worker, and 60 if the termination is done by the employer. It also specified probationary periods in the employment contract. So these are all things that really help companies create a more attractive work environment and give workers confidence, and just an elevation of procedures and governance processes for companies themselves.
Yeah, I mean, this is just awesome. It shows a very developing and increasingly modern governance structure in Saudi Arabia that is making its economy more competitive. The way you do that is by attracting workers, as you just said. And the way to attract workers is to give them competitive benefits that they would at least get elsewhere or here in the United States more than you would get. And these types of things have incredible ripples into the Saudi economy. You have this affects families, obviously. Of course, it affects businesses, but if all businesses are on a level playing field, it doesn't really matter for them. As long as they're competing with each other, you're good. Love seeing this. This is a great story. I would love I would love some pat leave right around Halloween. It's not going to happen, but yeah, that's a little bit more progressive, you could say. It's definitely not much of a thing here. My buddy living in Germany got 6 months for pat leave and paternity leave, and I was just like, wow, man. Good for you. That's amazing. But yeah, love to see this. It's really cool.
I believe in Sweden you can get up to a year of paternity leave, but I think that you can divide it between the parents. So it's more like family leave, and you can decide who gets to take which portions of it. But some of it, and I was speaking to somebody in Sweden when I was just there a couple of weeks ago, who was saying that actually it's mandatory for the mother to take part of that family leave, which she wasn't a big fan of because she believes there should be more flexibility. So like even when you have the most progressive family leave policies, you still have people that have issues with how the laws are written out. So I think you'll never have everybody be fully satisfied. But what you can do, we all know that jobs are not just about salaries. And so improving these policies really do help people make decisions about the type of work they're willing to do and what kinds of benefits they are, looking for, and how companies can then take these as a baseline and build on top of that to create more lucrative and, kind of attractive workplaces.
Yeah, totally. I wonder how that would go here in my house. Hey, honey, great job on the birth. You're headed back to work tomorrow. I'm taking the year off. All those days are mine. I got the kid, no problem. Thank you so much. But very, very cool. Really great to see these sort of, maybe not under the radar, but not, major headline development things happening in Saudi Arabia. And if you turn away for 1 week or twice a week as we do this show, you may miss something like this. This is significant. This impacts many angles and many corners of the Saudi economy and sends really a message globally that this is in fact a country that is reforming, and it's not just the top level things that you're reading about. Goes all the way down to the way governance works in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So mabruk to the authorities and to all the families and workers that will benefit from this.
The Ministry of Culture expands cultural scholarship program, adding 118 educational institutions that people can go to. So the Ministry of Culture announced the expansion of its cultural scholarship program by adding 118 educational institutions to its list of accredited institutions. The initiative aims to support national talents, meeting the growing needs of the labor market, which we were just talking about, and achieve the cultural goals of the vision. The expansion brings the total number of educational institutions supported by the program to 278, spanning 15 different countries. The largest number of institutions are in the United States, with 58, followed by 40 in the UK, and 1 in Russia. Students can obtain scholarships in 13 different cultural fields.
I don't see the University of Virginia on this list. I don't have the full list in front of me. Maybe it was just a mistake that it was left off, but the newly accredited institutions include prestigious international universities such as the University of San Francisco, Arizona State University, University of Colorado Boulder, Royal Holloway, the University of London, University of Liverpool, Padova University in Italy, and Lund University in Sweden. Of course, this program, the Cultural Scholarship Program, is the 2.0, or maybe you could say the 3.0 of what used to be the King Abdullah Scholarship Program. Is that right? It's basically like they have sort of advanced it so that it's not a blanket scholarship program. It's not quite the I'm out of my
You're right.
league here.
You're right to a certain degree. So actually, this is a completely new scholarship program that is offered by the Ministry of Culture, which is, so you do have the King Abdullah Scholarship Program has a 2.0 or even a 3.0 version of it underway at the moment, which started in 2005. But this is a new scholarship program completely that's offered by the Ministry of Culture. So it's different to the scholarship program that most people know, which is, the custodian of the two holy mosques scholarship program that King Abdullah started. This one came with the establishment of the Ministry of Culture. And it's only focusing on, as they mentioned, I think 13 different cultural fields that you can go and study in. So it's slightly different, but you're not wrong completely.
I'm not completely wrong. It's always good to have that, maybe your 5% correct thing. You hang your hat on that. But yes, I guess I was confused. So yes, you had the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, which at its height was, I think, 120,000 students annually and their families, full room and board and all costs to go study abroad. Since then, they have sort of scaled that back and made it more specific to higher universities that are of a higher caliber for a fewer number of students in focused, strategically important sectors or educational focuses, I guess you could say. This is a different one. I should have listened instead of not listening. But yeah, so this is a cultural scholarship program. It's comprehensive, includes a wide range of specializations, as you just noted. In cultural and artistic fields, scholarship students will have their study costs covered, receive financial guarantees, living expenses for themselves and their companions, medical insurance, travel tickets, and ongoing academic development support and evaluation. Pretty significant impact these things have. The most impactful program I maintain the Kingdom has done, maybe ever, probably outside the vision, is the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, which was just incredible. And that was a cultural program just as much as it was an educational program, because the cultural diffusion that occurred during that time, almost all of my Saudi friends have studied on that program and are now back in Saudi Arabia using their expertise that they got elsewhere to enrich lives in the Kingdom. I love seeing this, especially now that I fully understand it. This is a really, really good move from Saudi authorities, if I may say.
Yeah, I mean, the scholarship program has been incredibly influential over the years within the Kingdom. I mean, thinking back to 2000, it's been almost 20 years, right? It's 19 years this year since they started the program. And it's just amazing to think about that. One of the main reasons isn't just that these young people are going and studying at the top universities in the world, which now, as you mentioned, the scholarship program has narrowed down which institutions you can go to. In the past, it was really just going abroad. What it's really done is elevated people's perception of the importance of cultural exchange, understanding differences, being more tolerant, more accepting to difference. And I think that is super important because it really does make the Kingdom more open to this diverse workforce and population that they're aspiring to develop with Vision 2030. So it's really great foundations for that.
Love it. Drama in the boxing world, Dr. Hanaa. The Daily Mail, which is a guilty pleasure of mine, even though it is ridiculous, as many know, is known for its ridiculous headlines. Here's another one. This one's from August 7th. And this is the headlines. We're not like pushing this, but Turki Al-Sheikh accuses Canelo Alvarez of, quote, looking for easier fights, end quote, as Saudi Arabian boxing kingpin tears is, of course, capitalized in the Daily Mail style, into Mexican superstar for turning down super fight with Terence Crawford. The Mexican superstar demanded £118 million to fight Terence Crawford. Speculation of a super fight between Alvarez and Crawford ramped up after the latter dethroned Israel Madrimov to claim the WBA and vacant WBO super welterweight world titles. Al-Sheikh even extended an offer, allegedly, to Alvarez's camp the same day of Crawford's bout against Madrimov. Such was his desire to stage the fight. Go Daily Mail.
This was so great. I love the Daily Mail's headlines. They're so ridiculous. And just, you can kind of understand the entire article from just the headline usually, but then reading the details is almost as pleasurable. I think it's hilarious. So according to the article, Al-Sheikh the chairman of Saudi Arabia's General Entertainment Authority, wrote, "I decided to disregard the Canelo fight as I don't want it anymore" on X. Alvarez, who defends his WBA, WBC, and WBO super middleweight titles against Edgar Berlanga on the 14th of September, responded by claiming that he didn't really care about facing Crawford anyway. "I'm good with what I'm doing," Alvarez told Fight Hype. "I don't need that kind of thing. I'm not looking for that kind of fight. If they want the fight, okay. It's my way, not their way." I just love this. This is such a ridiculous fight. So Alvarez's statement sparked a response from Al Sheikh, who claimed that the Mexican is only interested in, quote, making easy show-only fights. "I heard what Canelo said, that he respects me, but doesn't like the way we do business," Al Sheikh wrote on X. "As for him respecting me, it doesn't matter to me if he does or does not. As for the way I do business, I know why he doesn't like it, because I only target big fights at fair prices. So, of course, anyone who likes easy fights won't like that. And I know how he feels after losing to Bivol. So he's been looking for easier fights ever since. Although I'm not the only one who's afraid of fighting Benavidez or Crawford. Therefore, I knew he was wasting our time and making excuses with big amounts of money that can't be paid." And it goes on. But yeah, it's according to the Daily Mail last bit, Al Sheikh has quickly catapulted himself into becoming one of boxing's biggest names, having shelled out millions to host mega fights in Saudi Arabia.
I love the Daily Mail. You really don't need to think for yourself. You can just look at it and read it. It's the ultimate potato chip news source. And in fact, it's like one of my favorite accounts to follow on social media, because I'm not going to go to the Daily. I mean, I used to, I guess, but I'm not going to go to the Daily Mail homepage and wander around in this sea of ridiculous headlines and sensationalism. However, if you really want to stay on top of pop culture, it's one way to do it. It's really funny because half the time I have no idea what celebrities they are, and they're usually walking out of some LA coffee shop with a hoodie. I'm like, who the heck is that? I don't know who that is or who cares. But it is interesting because we talked about this earlier, Dr. Hanaa, in an earlier episode. Of course, the PIF is now in active discussions reportedly with multiple boxing stakeholders to create a league, potentially a boxing league, potentially reshaping the competitive landscape for the sport across the world. And they're looking at maybe valuing it between $4 and $5 billion and, maybe pouring $1 billion or more into this. That seems like a really good investment versus one-off fights, certainly with boxers who may not want to come or maybe entering into public spats with Turki Al-Sheikh. I mean, I'm very excited about this league. I'm not a boxing guy, as probably every listener can tell at this point. Neither of us are. But it's really interesting because it is one of the main entertainment offerings in Saudi Arabia today. Especially in the winter, you had a ton of really good fights that were held across Saudi Arabia. And then you had several in Riyadh. You had Fury Usyk, which was cool because I was staying in the same hotel as at least their teams, which was really rad. It was very it was, each fighter has a ton of people to support them. So they were all hanging out in the hotel, which was awesome. Anyway, I'm way off topic, but interesting. Dr. Hanaa, I think maybe we should end on that one because that's a good one. What do you think?
I think we're good. Yeah. Thanks for your earlier deep dive on boxing. Do you remember which episode that was? Because it'd be great if we could refer listeners back.
I think that our listeners should just go to the2030.com or
listen
wherever they're getting their
all
podcasts,
of our
because sometimes, when you're producing these things as we both do, you got to have a little bit of a reminder, and I don't have that in front of me, but you should definitely go back and listen to that deep dive.
We did have a deep dive. Maybe we'll put it in our show notes, which episode
we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, if you're really interested, because the PIF thing is very interesting when it comes to the sport, which does need a major reorganization for a litany of reasons. You have, disorganization, you have multiple promoters, claiming greatest boxer in the world. It shouldn't be so, questionable as to who is and who isn't. Before we conclude episode 23 today, we are going to get back into doing something we were doing earlier on and dropped due to busyness and other concerns, but we're bringing it back. It is so back, and that is the Arabic word of the show. Dr. Hanaa, enlighten me.
So my word for you today is walau. It's actually 2 words. It means and if or and something. Yeah, and if, basically,
Wait,
literally.
can you say it again? Wallo?
Walau.
Wallo. So it's not walla,
Yes.
which I hear all the time.
Walau. It's actually more of a Levantian, like Lebanese phrase. So literally it translates into and if, but it actually means don't worry about it. Of course, don't mention it. That kind of thing.
So you're like,
if
what
somebody
if?
says
Or like,
thank
what about
you,
it kind of thing. Yeah?
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if somebody says thank you, you'd be like, "Walau," like, of course I
Thank
would have
me?
done this
Thank
for
you. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wallo.
It's a great
Okay.
one. Very
Okay.
easy to
And
say.
is this now popular in the Arabian Peninsula? Is it part of the lexicon in Saudi Arabia generally?
Yes, it's always been, I would say. People use it a lot. You know, I think it's important to remember, like, okay, it might not be like a Saudi phrase, but like there's so much diversity and a lot of different forms of Arabic that are spoken in Saudi because there just is a huge population from around the Arab world that you're going to get all sorts of different phrases. But this is just it's a really convenient one.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a good one.
I'm going to mix it in. One thing that's very interesting to me is I hear Saudis say all the time, voila. Like it's very much part of the lexicon and part of the everyday use of Saudis. And
Yes.
it means I swear to God, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you wouldn't say that in English much. And I basically never hear that in English because it's kind of against Christianity a little bit to say, I swear to God. You typically wouldn't say that. When people say it,
Yeah.
they really mean it. And so when I learned what wallah meant and then understood how much it was actually used in everyday parlance in Saudi Arabia, I was kind of like, wow, you guys are really convicted about whatever you're saying. And it's just a lot more common in Saudi Arabia, I think, east
In
to Saudi
Arabic.
Arabia. Yeah.
And in Muslim communities in general, like I'll be in London sometimes on the tube and there's like 2 like British Muslims talking to each other and you'll just, every other word is wallah.
Yeah, it's totally
And how we
different.
practice
If
these
I
things.
said, I swear to God, growing up in a Christian household, that would not have been a very popular thing amongst my parents. And so you don't really hear it much. But sometimes
Yeah.
people say it and you're like, and now that I've spent a lot of time in Saudi Arabia, it's really weird because I'm like, oh, wow, you must really mean this. Whereas in Saudi Arabia, it's like, but wallo. Am I saying that
Walau.
right? Wallo.
Wallo?
Okay, cool. Wallo? Okay,
There
good
you
one,
go.
Dr. Hanaa. Thank you very much. Let's also now conclude with our new segment, which we introduced 2 episodes ago, and that is the shoutouts.
Let's do a shout out. So I want to do a shout out to Dunya Abu Talib. So she was the Saudi Olympic contestant who was competing for, what was it? Hang on a second.
Taekwondo, or is it a...
It was Taekwondo, but I'm just looking at her category. So she was in the flyweight under 49 kg category in Taekwondo. And she made it to the quarterfinals and just came short of a bronze medal. So it's unfortunate she didn't come home with a medal, but she made it pretty far. And what was exciting about her, and I loved how kind of her journey was reported as a real win for Saudi women and real win for Saudi women in the Olympics. She was, one of the first people to qualify for the Paris Olympics. So shout out to her for making it to the quarterfinals, for being one of the strongest Saudi Olympians that competed, and for really making headlines and for opening doors for more Saudi women to compete in the future.
There is a Saudi Taekwondo Federation that's part of the
There is.
Olympic Federation for Saudi Arabia, and that it encompasses, it was originally named, the Taekwondo, Karate, and Judo Federation. And yeah, I mean, this is really cool. Very happy for her, and what a cool journey. It must have been really fun to be in Paris with all of the best athletes in the world, and she held her own, it sounds like, so congratulations to her. And looking forward to Los Angeles in 2028. Perhaps she sharpens the skills even more and comes home with some hardware. We'll see. But anyway, congratulations to her. My shout out, Dr. Hanaa, is I think to the first non-Saudi in the shout out section. But I do want to give a shout out to Sir Edward Byrne. He is the new president of KAUST. KAUST is, of course, the King Abdullah University of Science Technology. That is one of the most impressive universities and campuses I've ever seen in my life. It is the beacon of Saudi Arabia in terms of education, one of the best schools in the world, and just truly one of the more impressive places that you can visit. It's north of Jeddah in a town called Thawal. And it's about, is that right, Thawal? I think so.
Thual.
Thawal, thank you. Yes. And so it's about an hour north if you go to Jeddah. If you want to go, you fly into Jeddah and you drive north. And it's, first of all, world-class university. They have some excellent areas in which they're leading their fields, especially in things like marine science and other things like agriculture. They have two very large supercomputers there, some of the largest supercomputers in the world. And that is a campus that it's like going there and looking into a future or a variation of a future of Saudi Arabia that is just, it's almost hard to describe. But anyway, I wanted to give a shout out, not just to Sir Edward Byrne, who is new president as of September 1st, but also to the KAUST community, which is an incredible community, especially for entrepreneurs and technologists and those who are really doing deep technology, advanced sciences. I think he replaces Tony Chan, who was there and had a long duration as new president. Of course, His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, announced a new strategy for KAUST to sort of accelerate some of the technology development and entrepreneurship and give it incentives to sort of bring it into the market and to start creating jobs and contribute to the economy. And they use a hashtag, accelerating impact. And I think that's kind of a slogan that encompasses that new policy from His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to really bring the knowledge and the development of KAUST, which is probably 20 years old now, I think, around there, into an era where it is becoming more and more like Stanford and Berkeley and these other California colleges. So I just want to give a shout out to Sir Edward Byrne. Good luck in your new job. And I believe it'll be good for the KAUST community. So very excited for him.
Congratulations to him. I have a few things to add to that, just because in addition to congratulating him, we were basically highlighting KAUST as this incredible place. So I also wanted to say that it was very sad earlier this summer. So in July, Dr. Najah Ashri, who was the vice president and senior advisor within the office of the president, passed away. She was an incredible force for change. I was honored to sit on a panel with her last year at the labor market conference in Riyadh, and she also hosted me at KAUST in the past to speak to the SUSRI students, those are the students that are joining right before they graduate, the summer before their senior year of high school, to work with scientists on different STEM projects. KAUST is such a cool place, and their entrepreneurship center is just phenomenal. And the type of support that a lot of these young scientists get to take their ideas to the next level and really kind of commercialize it or expand on what they're doing and find partners and corporate sponsors to help them accelerate their science and bring it into the mainstream is absolutely amazing. So they do some just really phenomenal work there. I'm a huge fan of the university. I believe it was founded in around 2010. So it's not quite 20 years yet. I'm not 100% sure, but I also had the honor of visiting right after they opened, because I, at the time, was with Rawabi as a corporate social responsibility manager, and our chairman, Sheikh Abdulaziz Turki, was invited to speak. And so I was on that kind of trip with him, a couple of the other senior members of the organization. So definitely, I'm not a scientist. I'm natural scientist. I'm a social scientist, but I find the university to be just an incredible beacon of transformation. And their symbol, actually, they have this cool statue that they call the beacon. So I think it's very telling. It's a very cool place.
Well, I am a scientist. When I play golf and I get up to putt, I can read any green perfectly. And I think that's a science. Outside of that, I'm not either, but it is very impressive what they built in KAUST. KAUST was founded in 2009. I'm counting you as being more right than me, but still wrong. And it's about 15 years
I was
old now.
going to say 9 or 10, but
Okay,
I
well,
thought, I know I went there in 2011 maybe. So I knew it was
Okay.
very new at the time.
Yes. And so Sir Edward Byrne, I mean, very interesting guy. He's a neuroscientist. He's been particularly strong in mitochondrial disease research. And of course, he was knighted. He's a knight, which is awesome. And that took place in 2020. So he's got quite the resume. He was principal of King's College London from 2014 until 2021. And in his personal life, he has a keen interest in fly fishing and classical music and poetry. And he has 4 books published on poetry, which is kind of amazing, through the Melbourne University Press. So using both sides of the brain, which is terrific. Love to see it. Sir Edward Byrne, congratulations. Dr. Hanaa, thank you very much.